to this, which is our fourth webinar in a series on sustainability and environmental issues. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Project LookSharp, we're a media literacy initiative of Ithaca College. We provide professional development and support for educators who are working to build critical thinking and media literacy into their work with young people, both in K through 12 and college education, and also in community education outside of formal education. So in addition, we develop curriculum kits, lessons, and materials to support media literacy education, all of which are free for educators on our website, including the energy lessons that you'll be learning about tonight. So tonight's speaker is Sox Sperry. He is our main curriculum writer and longtime program associate, and he's the author or co-author of all of our sustainability and environmental curriculum materials, and an international expert on sustainability education. So I'm really pleased to turn this over to him. So, Sox, you're on.
Thank you, Cindy, and it's delightful as always to be here with Project LookSharp's webinar tonight on media constructions of energy choices, empowering students to see through the smoke. Delighted to have everybody on board. And Kelsey, if we can get the first slide up on the PowerPoint, that'll be great. Really appreciate people's willingness to engage tonight and to participate. This, as Cindy said, will be very interactive. Kelsey, I think, mentioned that as well. And that's part of our understanding of media literacy education, is it focuses on interactivity and inquiry. We're going to jump into that in just a minute. But before we do, I want to just highlight this graphic that Cindy Scheid designed in collaboration with the rest of our staff. And I think it does a really excellent job of really describing what we understand the process of media literacy education to be about. We'll focus on many different aspects of this tonight, particularly though on the central circle here, inquiry and reflection, which is the really basis for so much of our work. And tonight's webinar in particular will focus a lot on the whole process of inquiry, how we create questions that will be useful when it comes to mining the media documents for deeper understanding and reflection that will then lead to action. Tell you a little bit about what the intent tonight is in terms of our webinar goals. As was mentioned before, we'll be doing some touring of our LookSharp curriculum materials related to energy topics. As was said before, and I'll say it again, everything available on our website is free and available for you to use, both the teaching materials, the media documents, etc. We'll also be then exploring ways to encourage creative questioning, as I mentioned before, as teachers in the classroom, and practicing media document decoding and creation of questions. And then at the end, we'll make sure that there's some time to do some more question answering on from questions you may have about our process, Project LookSharp, and the whole process of media literacy education. I do want to point out that many of the materials that you'll see were developed for high school classroom teachers as a primary audience, but we've also many times used these in community education contexts, which I know some of you are working in. They can also be adapted easily for college and middle school. And so I encourage you to make use of both the pedagogical background, but also the media documents here, and make them work for your particular situation. So we're going to jump right into a chat to begin with, presenting here two media documents, one an advertisement from 2007 in a major magazine, and the second a magazine cover, National Geographic. And let's just begin with chatting, typing in the chat box, which we'll be doing a lot of tonight, and I hope everybody will participate in this, make our conversation a lot more interesting. How does each message make you feel about the effects of driving? Let's just start with that, and I'll be quiet for a minute while people are typing. So Shayla's saying very concerned. And if you want to, in particular, type in which document might create that particular feeling, feel free, document 1 or document 2. Uncharted America feels like we have an abundance of resources to travel. So maybe not so concerned if we've got an abundance of resources there. Sporty cards making us feel connected to the wild. Driving into wild nature, says Scott, and we're in trouble on the second one. Partly what I wanted to do to start here is to just suggest that when we begin this process of media literacy education, sometimes it's just a great idea to put up a couple of docs. Companion documents are really wonderful in this regard, and say, what do you think? What do you see? What do you feel? A real good way to just begin to get into the conversation, since part of the way that so many of us process media documents is through emotional channels. I also just want to appreciate the variety of different voices that you'll notice in the chat boxes on the right. And this is an opportunity to really recognize the real diversity of responses that one might have. And that's part of the purpose of this, is to really explore this. Also just want to point out that you'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner a reference to the particular KITT that you can find these documents in. This is in the Media Construction of the Environment Resource Depletion lesson. It's slide 47, this pair. And so if you want to use these in your own setting, please feel free. Let's do a little bit of background now talk at the outset. I'll probably do more sort of instructive talking at the outset now than I will at any other point in the webinar. I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by constructivist media decoding, which we see as a means to encourage students to act on their knowledge in the world, a central purpose of Project LookSharp, and I'm sure of many of you as educators. So what do we mean by constructivist questions? We're talking about questions that are based in interactivity and asking questions and continuing to harvest questions. In many ways, constructivist questions are more interested in the question itself than necessarily in a particular answer, but in providing series of answers and opportunities for students to really sustain and extend their thinking through consistent probing around authorship, purpose, technique. These kind of questions tend to be very complex. We're looking for multiple readings rather than single readings and nuanced interpretations, understanding that different ones of us construct different meanings ourselves from different media constructions. And some of the ways that we can get at that complexity is always to ask, why do you think that? Where do you see the evidence in the document to support what you think? And how might different people understand this same message quite differently? We're always, as I mentioned just now, looking for evidence in the document. This is a way to help sharpen students' critical thinking skills and asking them to reflect on their own individual constructions. So once again, where's the evidence in the document? And how did you get at that conclusion from viewing the document itself? And finally, we're really interested in looking at constructivist questions as a springboard to help students develop deeper moral reasoning around ethical issues of importance to themselves and to all of us. What do you learn about yourself from your interpretation? And then what actions might you take in response to this message? I do want to mention at this point that there's a brand new element, just I think today introduced to Project LookSharp's website. At the top bar that you'll look at when you click on LookSharp's homepage, you'll see DIY guide, do-it-yourself guide. If you click on that, you'll notice that there are a number of different areas that you can click on that have to do with helping us think more deeply about designing media literacy exercises and lessons. And one of the four focuses on question design. And you can click on question design, and there'll be a drop-down menu, includes things like understanding the nature of effective key questions, addressing content knowledge, literacy, and critical thinking, designing effective probe questions, develop culminating and further questions. These are all available now on the website through a series of drop-down menus that, if you're interested in taking this whole idea further, would be a great way to do that. And I want to really thank Sherry for moving ahead and getting that up there. So right before we start into chatting again, I want to mention this key questions to ask when analyzing media messages sheet. Once again, if you haven't downloaded this already, please do so. You can do that by clicking on the file box at the top to download it. And these key questions are ones that I'm using all the time when I'm developing curriculum lessons for Project LookSharp kits. Really an excellent collection developed by Project LookSharp in combination with National Media Literacy, namely our National Media Literacy Education Organization. And we'll be referencing this document in particular, the key questions to ask when analyzing media documents, throughout tonight. And again, the purpose of all these questions and our media literacy education to help students reflect on values and beliefs as they impact personal choices and as those personal choices lead to action in the world. So let's go to another chat question, the basis for much of our work tonight. And we're going to go right to the questions themselves. What might be a good constructivist question that might begin a discussion about this book cover? Again, noticing in the bottom right hand, you can find this in the Resource Depletion Kit, slide 32. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes, take a look at the key questions to ask or come up with your own. What are some questions you might put out to get a group of students or people talking about this image and what it means? So I'll encourage you to just jump into the chat here, and I'll pause for a few minutes while you're doing that. So Linlin begins with a great content question. Is the Word going to provide? Will the world provide for us what we need, and how long will that supply last? Lori, who do you think the authors might represent? Great question. So this is about sourcing and also economics. Who is it? What perspectives are being brought forward by the authors themselves? Shayla, the kind of actions that one might take in response to this message. Also, of course, central to what our concerns are, which is how does education lead to action itself? Different documents will lead to different courses of action, different understandings. Great question by Barbara, and this has to do with ethics and values. How can we just talk about waste as virtuous? Really a provocative subtitle, of course, and a great opportunity for a class to really grapple with some critical issues of ethics and consumption. Virtue jumping right out at us. I love the questions about who might benefit and who might be harmed as well, Catherine points out. Really important to think about that. What's not just what the intent, but what's the effect? Who's going to really benefit from a message like this? And I would add a corollary to that is who might be harmed by this message? And Nancy's pointing out, what does the word never really mean? Do we trust it? We will never run out of energy. Great question, Scott, too. Are wells truly bottomless? Maybe not. Let's go on to another one now. Again, a paired document set, and do a similar thing. What are some good constructivist questions to begin a discussion about this DVD cover, also available in the Resource Depletion Kit? I'll be quiet while you type. if I were using this one in a classroom, I might do just what we've done, put each one of these two together, up individually and then pair them together. Nancy's making the point that this cover invokes a sense of immediacy to make serious changes. We might compare that to the prior cover on the bottomless well and talk about never and immediate, and why different perceptions come from these different covers. Who said this in the news? Great question. Is it the consumer, the oil company, or all of us? I hope you understand now from just looking at this that these questions all can lead into very rich conversations in the classroom. There's so many different places they can go. And in constructivist media decoding, I'm not thinking going into the class necessarily where I want to steer the conversation, but rather that's going to move from what's coming forward from the class itself. So we might talk about benefit or impact or what the intention was of creating the particular image that we have, the use of color in the image or the use of the noose. This would be particularly interesting for classes who are working themselves on media construction. But then we also want to talk about the issues that were raised in the prior set of questions around ethics, values, and also about actions. Shayla's talking about why does each take the position it does, and take a look at the funding source itself. I'm going to move forward now, and we'll now going to take a look at a couple of videos, but I want to give you a little bit of background on these. These can be found in Lesson 6 of our Media Constructions of Sustainability, Food, Water, and Agriculture kit. On the right-hand side, for those of you who have attended our last webinar, you may have noticed that it's a similar format. On the right, we're talking about the lesson design itself. And the 3 bullets have to do with the particular kind of question design that we're looking for. In the first instance, in this lesson around content, understanding the arguments for eating local food or exported food from a distance. The Common Core skill in particular in this lesson and this exercise, for those people who are teaching with the Common Core, this has to do with reading informational text where we're asked to integrate information from several texts on the same topic. And the media literacy skills, in particular, having to do with interpretations and different interpretations, and also response, actions we'll take. I also just want to point out to you that in the introduction to this kit, Media Construction of Sustainability, Food, Water, and Agriculture, in the introduction, there is a thematic listing that allows you to take a look at different topic areas, in this instance fossil fuels, so that you can actually pick particular documents from this kit and use those, pulling them together to make your own media literacy lesson that will include documents from multiple different kits. So I'm just calling your attention to that because I think it's something that can be useful for those of us who are picking and choosing from various different lessons. So what we'll do now is I'm going to show you 2 different videos. The first one is Why Eat Local? You'll hear Michael Pollan, food journalist, author of Omnivore's Dilemma and other books relating to food and consumption. And it appeared, this clip, in the Nourish Initiative, educational venture devoted to sustainable food future. And as you're watching the video, I want you to do the same thing we did with the covers, which is, what are some questions that jump out, in particular in the left-hand categories? Those of you who've downloaded in the middle that broad yellow strip, authorship, purpose, etc. Kelsey, you can go ahead and play the video if you would.
When we think about global warming, we think about transportation, we think about how we heat our houses. But in fact, how we eat has just as big an impact on climate change. The average item of food in America has traveled 1,500 miles from the farm to your plate. It's burned up an incredible amount of fossil fuel just to get there. If you're eating lettuce, say, in New York that's been grown in California, one of those bags of pre-washed mixed lettuce, it takes 56 calories of fossil fuel energy to deliver 1 calorie of food energy to your plate. For the consumer to understand how much energy goes into their food, I think all they have to understand is, if it's local, it's less, and if it is unprocessed. A lot of the energy in our food comes from processing. All the complicated steps needed to make a Twinkie, all use vast amounts of energy. There are a great many other benefits to eating locally besides conserving energy. There is, I think, the very important benefit of keeping farmers in business. Farmers add a lot to a community. They have great wisdom about the natural world. And then there is the view. There's a wonderful bumper sticker in Europe called Eat Your View. And the premise is that if you don't support these agricultural landscapes around you, they will be sprawled. They will be covered with houses and highways and shopping malls. And the way to keep them open is to eat from the farms that constitute that view. And that's true. I mean, that's how you preserve those agricultural landscapes, is eating from those farms.
Okay, so I want to encourage you now to just jump into the chat. It's been a great conversation, very interactive thus far. Before we see the next video, and let's talk about which key question categories jump out and why. Or questions themselves. Feel free to put those in. Tonight's all about harvesting questions. You saw some images of harvest before. We're talking about harvesting questions here. What are some questions that you might harvest? Have you visited a local farm? Great question, because it immediately brings it right back to sort of personal reflection and personal experience. What are they growing and producing in our area? Could you survive only on these foods and products? So this is a content question, of course, and has to do with personal experience and personal reflection. There are also media literacy questions that we could come up with as well. I'm going to let some folks just weigh in on this before we go to the next paired document. How can we reduce the carbon footprint of the food on our dinner table? And when I'm looking down the list here, this one really has to do with response. What kind of actions might I take in response to this question? This is a great media literacy question on response, actions that I might take that Lenlin's pointing out. Do they ever include information about where the food's coming from in advertising or store displays that we see? Cindy's pointing out a really great question, which is what's missing from our media documents, whether it's a store display or an advertisement. So this is sort of the flip side of the content. What's it about? What's it not about? Have they left out? Think about your last meal, says Rebecca. What foods were local? What foods could have been local? And how did calories you consume compare to the calories the food took to prepare? Great math questions for those of you who are interested in integrating math and media literacy, but also looking at personal reflection. I'm going to keep moving forward. I know there's some great questions coming up, and we'll play this next video, if you will, Kelsey.
Grows our economy? Who ships nearly $100 billion of crops and products to many nations? Who provides more than 24 million jobs here at home? Who? America's farm families. As farming grows, so does our quality of life. We're all connected through agriculture. It's as true today as it has been for generations. America's farmers grow America.
Money went into producing this video, and how does that influence its impact? We might also talk about the parity or not between the money that Nourish Initiative might be able to put into Video 1 and its distribution, and the same for Video 2, which is produced by Monsanto. Authorship then really important, of course, as Nancy and Kelsey have pointed out. Why is Monsanto saying farmers are making money? Really good question. How are they making money, and who's making money on the farmers and what they need in order to produce crops? Content questions, questions also about economics, who paid for this, and perhaps also about the impact. Do farmers benefit from these messages or not? And in which ways? Cindy's saying, asking kids, who's Monsanto? Where do they get their money? I would argue also we should ask about the Nourish Initiative. Where do they get their money? And then have a conversation about that. Catherine, do you notice language that overlaps with sustainability movement, localization?
Sorry for the brief technical difficulty. We're working on getting Sox back up. Thank you for your patience, and hopefully he'll be able to continue here very briefly.
I just wouldn't connect my... Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go, you hear you, Sox. Yep, we do.
Great. Okay, sorry for that. So this is a lesson that's going to look at, in particular, the history of media representation of natural resources and resource depletion, common core skills in reading and history and social studies, identifying aspects of a text that might reveal an author's point of view or purpose, and the media literacy skills relating to economics and techniques. Many of these we've already been addressing, of course. So here's a document pair, side by side. What are some questions you might ask about this document pair? On the left, a National Geographic spread article on 2006 on coal, and the cover of American Coal magazine. So I'll pause for a minute and give people a chance to weigh in on some of your questions about these documents. Now I'm just pausing. I hope you can hear me while people are typing here. And as people are typing, I'll just mention that when you're looking for documents, I want you to also just notice the kind of decisions I'm making as a curriculum designer about which particular documents I'm putting forward and why. In this instance, I've chosen two that clearly have different messages, but also simple enough in terms of particularly the density of word choices that you can get some pretty quick surface reading on these. Lots of questions. Who are the folks presenting these messages? How do the image choices affect our ideas about coal? How does each image make you feel about coal? Back to the feeling question. Great one to start with. Nancy's pointing out that document 2, patriotic looking, and the one has a dirty industrial look to that. In a classroom might say, what's the evidence then for the patriotic look? What are you seeing in the image on the right that suggests patriotism? A flag, of course. On the left, what's the dirty industrial look? What's the name for that? Or what's the evidence for that? Smokestacks, a high hill of black coal. So we're always asking for evidence behind. Catherine herself asking the question, what's the purpose of the flag here? These documents, Dan is saying, might be paired with the local utilities resource planning document so students can find out how much coal is in their own energy mix. Great point. So now we're talking about bringing other documents in that have to do with coal use in our own particular venues where we live and seeing what the comparisons analysis might be there. Scott, what's the difference between price and cost? Having trade salespeople and consumers, this is a distinction we rarely see or hear from either. Really an important question there. Notice how clean and shining the coal in document 2 is, and in contrast in particular with document 1. Cal's pointing out about the use of the label American. US is grammatically viable, triggering an emotional patriotic response along with the flag, which weirdly looks like a human face. Hadn't noticed that before, but one of the things that's really interesting about this in a classroom is students always see things I've never seen before. And whether or not that was intended by the person who first constructed it, it's definitely present in the student's construction. And those can be really interesting conversations. Linlin, how do choices of images impact our understanding of these documents and others? What's different in the size of coal shown in each? Lori's asking to ask the kids, what more information do they want? What are the questions that they bring forward that aren't answered by or that might be suggested in these particular documents? Cindy, again, commenting price and cost, something that we not always would be able to think about necessarily. Shayla's talking about the technique. How do the image choices change the messages about coal? And Katie, foundation implies stability. Would our system crumble without it? Really important in terms of word choice. Let's move on now and look at another one. This is from a 1932 magazine ad, and the Ethel Corporation selling ethyl gasoline what questions might you get at here, or what questions might you ask that would get at purpose and historical context? So now I'm directing you to a particular set of questions on the media construction of media analysis. What are some questions, if you wanted to look at purpose or historical context, what might you ask in this instance? Not a lot of chatting going on in this one. Maybe I'll move it forward and just simply raise the idea that in 1932, what ethyl and the power of gasoline might mean in a relatively new car economy probably looks different 80 years later. What does the elephant represent? Great question. Circus is common now. Great question, Kelsey. So in 1932, most everybody would go to the circus in many parts of the United States, traveling around. Ringling Brothers, Cole Brothers, other circuses would travel. I used to live in the Midwest. There's a museum in southern Indiana devoted to circus travel. That would be a representation I think everybody would understand, much less so now. Why the circus theme? I'm also really interested in questions about power in this. The giant power of gasoline and power and control. Who's controlling the elephant? Why a man and a woman? And what does being able to control power have to do with a sales pitch for gasoline? Magic's being promoted. Power is magical in this instance. And we can ask the question, power portrayed as good or bad? Cindy's pointing out in a historical context, in that instance, elephants and circuses were wonderful things, but Barnum Bailey just dropped elephants because of so many protests. So this is an opportunity also to really engage students in talks about historical context that I think might be really interesting to someone, a student who might not really have a whole lot of interest in gasoline, but be interested in historical context and circuses and elephants, etc. What ideas of human control over the beast or nature are elicited? How might that connect with our control over natural resources like coal? How will a message become convincing and persuasive? I'm going to move on. Keep typing, please, on that one. This is a much more contemporary image now. What questions might you ask in this one to get at techniques and sponsorship? This is not one, by the way, that's included in our media construction kits at Project LookSharp, but one that I pulled off the web. The URL is there. And I'll give you a minute to take a look at this. Just the image, the titles. Give people a few seconds to catch up on this one. What questions might you ask to get at techniques and sponsorship for this webpage? Great question. How could you find out who sponsored this event? And if you can read in the small print, there's a mention there toward the bottom, a set of energy academics and professionals who appear in Gregory Kallenberg's Rational Middle, a series of short online films that discuss the future of energy. In a minute, we'll take a look more about what rational middle might mean. Lori, what do you think rational middle says about viewpoints at both ends? And leading into an important discussion about what is the middle? Why might we seek middle or not? Why is it important to hear other ends of the scale. Who funds Rational Middle online films? And Cal is noting, I did not know this, that the Rational Middle originated with the Reagan administration think tanks. So to control media and thus the messaging. What do you notice about word choice? Experts, energy debate, Rational Middle. So I'm going to click on another slide here. Feel free to keep typing. I also was curious, as you, about Rational Middle. So I clicked on that, got to this page, and then when I looked at the About, lo and behold, Rational Middle, an energy series sponsored by Shell Oil. The views expressed as part of the Rational Middle energy series may not necessarily reflect the views of Shell, and they also may. And so one of the questions there is, Duke University sponsoring Rational Middle energy series. Sounds very rational, sounds middle of the road. Who produced it? For what purpose? The second two, and I just want to, now I'm looking at my key questions to ask. Authorship, who made the message? Rational Middle. Why was it made? Who's the target audience? Who paid for it? Who might benefit for it? Who might be harmed by it? Why might it matter to me? All of those questions relating to audience and authorship, important ones that one might ask about these. Scott's noting, what's the socioeconomic group that's targeted here? Rational Middle has led to the current atmosphere of doubt about climate change. So that's why the word debate is an important word to question in this instance. How much does Shell contribute to Duke? Asks Cindy. So these questions about economics are pretty central. Oftentimes they don't get asked. They're really important ones to ask. I realize people are continuing to type, and I'm going to move it forward just in the interest of time. I'm going to show you two different web pages, both having to do with the incident in the Gulf a number of years ago, having to do with the BP oil well. And so I want you to take a look at this. This is BP's page on the Deepwater Horizon accident. This is a page on the same incident from the Wonk Room. BP calls blowout disaster inconceivable, unprecedented, and unforeseeable, and labeling it B-apocalypse. And let's put them side by side. What are some questions you might ask to get at authorship credibility with these two web pages, BP and the Wonk Room, about the incident in the Gulf? So this is an interesting question to begin with, of course. Rather than focusing on the differences, let's talk about the similarities. Nancy's saying, is there a difference in the article's titles? Yes. Why the word choice? Word choice, of course, is a central part of technique. Cal, the horrible term accident, a gas release, made it sound like it was just fireworks, trivializing versus disaster or bepocalypse. Katie comparing the author's use of accident and bepocalypse. And what are the differences in the photo and why? There really are differences there as well. So we're looking now at media construction and media construction as it impacts the message as designed by the particular source. Also want to point out something we call weak sense, strong sense critical thinking. if we're asking sharper questions about the document or source that we might critique based on our own value system, and don't do the same thing by asking sharp questions of a document that's produced by people we agree with, what about that? Should we be willing to ask similar sharp and pointed questions for both of these documents, or just for the BP document? Why would one show a close-up and the other a distant view? BP stance further away than the stance of the wonk room. An important point. No one's asked about the wonk room. I know a little bit about BP, as do you. I probably filled my car up with gas from a BP station. Don't know much about the wonk room. Also important to ask those questions. Back to authorship, as Catherine's saying, what political perspective is the wonk room coming from? How could you find out about that if you don't know? I'm going to move forward now. And for those of you who are teachers, I just want to note that the focus tonight on asking questions really ties in a very direct way to Common Core speaking and listening skills in ELA by propelling conversations by posing and responding to questions that relate to current discussion, to broader themes or larger issues. So we're right on the mark for that. And with the new C3 framework for social studies state standards, the first dimension of 4 is all about developing questions and planning inquiries, compelling questions and supporting questions. So the argument here is that if you're teaching in school settings, social studies, ELA, this whole idea about designing questions and encouraging students to do what I'm encouraging you to do, bringing questions to the fore, that is really a central part of what we're being asked to do with some of these newer standards. We're now going to do a different thing. We're going to take a look at corn ethanol from Biofuels Unit and the Media Construction of Sustainability KITT. We're going to play 4 videos, each one very short. While we play the videos, there'll be a poll up and asking each one of you to click on your answer about whether this is a pro-ethanol or anti-ethanol document and video. And please feel free to type into the chat your evidence, reference the particular video. Let's go ahead and go to the poll in the video. You can see the poll up on the top. Please click on the poll and make your votes fairly quickly because the videos are short, 15, 30 seconds.
It's clear that events here at home and abroad demand a different solution to our energy needs. One that protects our national security, safeguards our environment, and promotes economic growth. One answer grows in our own backyard, turning American corn into America's energy. It's renewable, abundant, and safe, and it creates American jobs. We feed the world. We can fuel it too. Ethanol. Now is the time.
I got the 51 cent per gallon subsidized ethanol blues. I do. The water table's dropping. My land is worth less than my shoes. We used to have something called free enterprise, but if you know the right people, you'll get subsidized. I got the 51 cent per gallon subsidized ethanol blues.
What if an answer to our dependence on oil
was growing right in front of us? What if we could lower greenhouse gas emissions with a fuel that grew back every year?
What if a company had already built over 1.5 million cars and trucks that could run on this fuel?
What if they were willing to build a whole lot more?
What if we could live green by going yellow?
Yellow is E85 ethanol. And one car company will lead us there. Go to livegreengoyellow.com.
Hi, I'm standing in front of a gas station and looking at the high price of gasoline because I'm also concerned about the high price of food. Do you realize that in the last year, food prices, the global food bill has gone up by more than $1 trillion and expected to go up by at least another $1 trillion this year? You know what that means for poor people around the world who are trying to buy that food? We were told the other day by the United Nations that at least 33 countries, in fact, are in danger of having food riots. Some of them are having food riots right now because they're seeing their food bills going up for basic commodities by even 40% in the last few months. That's really a crisis for the world. And what's that got to do with gasoline? Well, it's because the gasoline price is being tied to food prices, because we're using ethanol now. We're using what's called agricultural fuels or agrofuels to fuel our cars. And we're being told that that is a green revolution solution to our problems, that that's somehow going to make the world better for us because we're going to cut down on greenhouse gases. Well, scientists are telling us very clearly that's not true. That in fact, the more we use agricultural fuels, our crops to run our cars, we're going to find that we're actually destroying more of the environment than we did before. We're clear cutting the land for these fuels. We're boosting up the food prices, of course, but we're also using a hell of a lot of water to get that crop into our cars. It costs about 1,000 liters of water, some say 9,000 liters of water, to make 1 liter of ethanol. And we don't have that water, not in Canada, not certainly in Africa or Asia or Latin America, where most of our agricultural fuels are going to come from.
So I want to point out, as we look at these, that this is really just an example of a way for you in your classroom or setting to get a conversation going. These actually were pretty easy to identify, pro and anti. But if we took it the next step, which would be to make notes, what are some particular information that is being put forward as to the argument for or against ethanol, this moves it more into the critical thinking type education that we'd like to do. Also, of course, we can talk about techniques, source, ownership, etc. So this is an opportunity for us to really use a polling process, which you could do, of course, with just raised hands in the classroom. On the LookSharp website, there are actually 6 different videos, 2 other ones. We just showed you these. So it's an opportunity to use video in a way that raises these issues around energy choices in a way that we think is entertaining, engaging, and leads to broader conversations. I'm going to move now. We're moving toward our last 5 minutes, and just quickly note that the demonstration lesson that you'll see now is coming from the media construction of hydrofracking lesson in our media construction to Finger Lakes kit that includes 3 videos on Gasland, Google search, looking at that in terms of what as a media document, and then finally looking at these 2 different diagrams, one created by a natural gas industry and one by a grassroots group. And I think rather than chatting now, just because of time, I'm going to move forward and ask Kelsey to show us a clip. And as you look at this brief clip where Cindy is leading students through a discussion, go ahead and type in the chat, what do you notice about the teaching process itself? Go ahead, Kelsey.
Somewhere else. Okay, anything else that you're seeing in either of these images in terms of evidence that one might be pro-fracking, the other anti-fracking? That hasn't been mentioned so far. Yeah, Carl.
I feel like the quality of the one on the left is a lot better. Like it looks like a higher quality like production to show this, and I think that could represent that it's a pro-fracking group because it makes them look more credible, that they're like producing this high quality, better image.
So tell me more about that. What makes it look more high quality?
I guess just like the details in the layers, like it looks like it's like straight out of a science textbook, and therefore people might trust it even though it's being produced with all like ulterior motives to convince you of something. Okay, and I hear a little judgment there, ulterior motives.
And so you think that one is pro-fracking?
Yeah.
Or anti-fracking?
Pro-fracking, to be like taken seriously.
Okay, so I want to come back to when we look at both of these. What questions, if you were going to be judging the credibility of the information presented visually here, what kind of questions might you ask that would help you make that judgment? You know.
Well, where is this content coming from? Like, how is it paid for? Who made it?
Okay, let me slow that down a little bit. So, who made it? Where is it coming from? What's the source? And who paid for it? Who paid for this to be created? Carly was, in fact, implying that maybe the people in the one on the left had more money, therefore it was better quality, and that might be a piece. Michaela?
Also, where was it distributed and who saw it?
Where was it distributed? And both in terms of, what do you mean by where was it distributed?
Was it in a magazine or a textbook? Was it online? What audience was it meant? Who was meant to see it?
Who was targeted for, exactly. Any other questions that you'd like to know? Target audience, where was it shared, who made it, how was it paid for? Anything else that would help you judge credibility?
So I just want to notice that there's some really sharp observations here people are making. Linlin, the teacher probes students to cite evidence for their interpretations. Always a follow-up question. Where do you see this in the document? The probing, rather than telling, is of course all what constructivist media decoding is about. And Nancy's pointing out that Cindy is questioning the answers in order to dig deeper, get at deeper understandings. Teacher follows up on the student's response too. A good technique, not just accepting the initial answer, but saying, where do you see that? Say more about it. Teacher's able to repeat and put in a list what the student said, able to remember and list the responses. And as we practice this more and more, this kind of constructivist decoding, we're in a better position to be able to do exactly that. So I just want to point out that there are multiple different demonstration videos like this on our Project LookSharp site, available again free for you. You can click on Project LookSharp Multimedia or Video, media decoding examples, and they'll show you multiple ones using different kinds of techniques with different content as well. Well, we're getting close to our end here. I just want to point out some take-home points for tonight's webinar. Developing habits of inquiry, of course, is a primary goal of what we're about here at Project LookSharp, what good media literacy education is. We're trying to select documents that themselves are rich for question harvest, asking students, for instance, to come up with their own questions, what we mean by question harvest, creating questions that have nuanced interpretations, not just dualistic perspectives, but complex ones. Always asking where you see it in the document, asking for evidence, bringing forward divergent and hidden perspectives. We're not only here looking at media produced by large multinational corporations, but grassroots media as well. And then asking questions about ethical choices and actions taken on ethical choices. I want to note a few resources that you might want to take a look at. The Teacher's Guide to Media Literacy, linked to on our site by Cindy Scheib and Faith Rogo. An excellent starting point if you're interested in taking this work further. Greening Media Education by Antonio Lopez, a new title. Really a wonderful opportunity to look at the synthesis between sustainability education and media literacy education. I wrote an article in a recent issue of Green Teacher Magazine. There's a webinar up there about how to use media literacy as a means to go deep with deep emotion around issues of sustainability. Our Summer Institute coming up this summer in July. Really encourage people who might have an interest in taking this work the next step to consider that. We've got an upcoming webinar. Cindy will talk a little bit about this around critical thinking and health in May, and really encourage you to sign on that. This will be particularly focused for people working with younger children in the classroom. And finally, I know it's 8 o'clock. Before you sign out, if you would click on the link to take our short survey, that would be wonderful. We'd really appreciate it. So appreciate your participation. Wonderful participation throughout. Really enjoyed the experience tonight, and I think Cindy will be signing on as well. Those of you who would like to continue for some Q&A at this point, we will continue for another 10 or 15 minutes if you'd like. So we'll be here and available. Thank you all for your participation.
Okay, and I'm going to jump in. Let me just say that actually my book you can order through Amazon. You actually can't buy it through us. You could, but it would be faster and easier to buy it through Amazon or other sources online. It was published by Sage Corwin. But the book has a companion website that has lots of support materials, and that companion website is on the LookSharp site. So you can just go to the LookSharp site, and on the left-hand side, there's a place that says the Teacher's Guide to Media Literacy, and that'll give you information on where to purchase it as well, if you're interested. So really delighted to have everybody here. Such great conversations. And one of the things I want to note is, I've been doing this work a lot. I'm well familiar with these lessons and these media documents. And every single time I'm on one of these webinars or see this being taught, I learn new things and new questions to ask. That hadn't occurred to me. And I just want to note that for us, that's a key outcome of using this constructivist media decoding process, where you get people together and instead of telling them things, you ask questions and listen to what they have to say. And even more powerfully, as Sox did this time, you ask people what questions would they want to ask. So for me, Dan's point about all the farmers being white, it's of course a bias in almost every media example we see of farmers, and yet it's not a bias I had thought of. So really, just such a terrific point, and I will continue to raise that issue whenever I'm doing work around farming. So,
Cindy, I'd like to, if I can, just focus in on Lori's point here. I think it's an important one. Again, for those of you who are still in the room, please feel free to either comment about your own work as regards media literacy and energy choices and sustainability more broadly, but also ask questions of us. Please take the survey, if you will. That'll be helpful to us. But Lori's making the point, one of the biggest challenges is determining where to start with questioning, as the rest of the conversation will fall out in different ways depending on what questions you start with. And I think this is a really important point. You have to make a decision, and this has to do with your goals for the lesson up front, about what your focus will be. If you're working with a group that's never worked with media literacy before or never dealt with the topic before, you might want to start, as I did tonight, with a pretty open-ended question. What are you feeling about these two media documents? What are you reading here? What do you think about this? Very general questions just to sort of wade into the water. On the other hand, if you're focused on biofuels and you've been doing a study unit on it for several days and you want to sort of get a sense of where people are moving to, then with those last set of videos, you can do the poll and then really take it in particular to places that you might like to go in terms of uncovering some of the arguments pro and against. So I think the answer to Lori's question is it has so much to do with what your initial goals are as you design lessons. For those of you who are interested in that, I want to direct your attention to the DIY, the do-it-yourself links, where we talk about designing lesson goals, and also the last webinar, which is archived, was all about designing goals for lessons. I'm just scrolling through some of the questions.
I'm going to jump in and just say I really appreciate saying, please, more webinars. We need these documents. We've been working for a number of years to try to get funding to put up a website that would be called the Media Lit Exchange, where people could post media documents to be used by others and go to access media documents on a wide different range of topics. So we haven't had any success getting funding yet, but we continue to work on that for exactly that reason.
Speaking of that, Scott, it raises a really interesting point. The National Park Service trying to teach its rangers and educators to tell less and learn to engage visitors in a facilitated dialogue. Hard for old school rangers, hard for teachers as well, who've been taught in an educational system that's much more about teacher presenting and students regurgitating. But it is necessary and valuable. I'm commenting on your comments, Scott, because one of our staff members, Ari Kisilov, is a devoted natural parks visitor, been to many, many of the parks and historic sites, and we have talked about actually engaging with the National Park Service to develop lessons that would use Park Service documents, historic and contemporary, to do just what we tried to do tonight. So we're really interested in trying to take media literacy education out of the classroom, as it were, and would love to know about you, Scott, and others who are taking this work into the community and into your educational settings, how that might happen. We're always interested in that. Back to you, Cindy.
Yeah, and Scott had noted that early on, and just want to say that one of the reasons that we have posted on our website, if you go to our website on the right-hand side, there's a section on our homepage called videos, and we have a whole series of about 18 or 20 videos that show short clips of either I or Chris Sperry, who is Sox's brother, or a fifth grade teacher leading a decoding with a group of students to demonstrate this interactive inquiry-based approach. So we encourage you to use those if you're working in training for rangers or other educators and want to access some of those as examples of how you might do this inquiry-based dialogue. And Scott, if you know anybody at the National Park Service who wants to hire us to come in and work with rangers or people who train rangers on this kind of approach, we do that all the time. So just be in touch. That would be great.
Cindy, I want to just respond to Lori's question about where to access this. I want to point everybody's attention to Kelsey's note, projectlooksharp.org. The videos will be archived with the past webinars there. There's a webinar link, and you'll be emailed also, those of you who've participated tonight, where the archived webinar is available. And I'm not sure, Kelsey and Sherry, about the PowerPoint itself, whether it's available independent of the webinar or not. Maybe Sherry or Kelsey can let us know about that. Other questions, comments? I know there's still 11 of us in the room. Again, I want to encourage people to do the survey. And any other comments, thoughts, questions?
And while I'm just waiting for other questions, let me just say a few words about our upcoming webinar in May. Most of you are probably not working with young children in early elementary or middle elementary grades, but if you know people who are interested, whether they are elementary school teachers or after school teachers or parents who are doing homeschooling, we're going to be focusing on using these media literacy approaches and this inquiry-based approach to get young kids to think about media messages that are aimed at them. And we're going to particularly focus on nutritional messages, helping kids recognize, even before they can read, how could you tell if there is actually fruit in something like Fruit Loops or fruit by the foot? Sure sounds like there's a lot of fruit in it, but how can you tell? And the kinds of questions that young kids can be taught to ask early on about who made this and what's their purpose. And are they using tricks to try to convince me to buy something or to ask a grown-up to buy it for me? And it may be they're not telling me everything that's important to know. We've been piloting these, using these in the Ithaca area for a long time. And have actually conducted research on their effectiveness, and they really work well. We get that feedback from both the kids themselves and also from parents when the kids go home and say, you know what, guess what? That there's no fruit in Fruit Loops, and it has a lot of sugar. So, so we'll be talking about a whole series of new lessons that we'll be putting up later this spring that include things like looking at cereal commercials, at restaurant kids meal commercials, at the foods that are advertised in the media, and also comparing that with the basic food groups and with the My Plate approach to nutrition, and many, many other approaches. So please share that information with anybody you know as we go along.
Cindy, I want to move us toward closure tonight. I expect a number of people still in the room may be taking the survey, so please continue with that. We really appreciate your participation. It was a wonderful dialogue tonight, and I just hope you can imagine how this could happen actually in a classroom as well. So on behalf of Cindy and myself and the LookSharp team, I want to thank you, and in particular I want to thank and nod to Kelsey for doing such a great job with production tonight for the first time. So, thank you all. Good night.
Good night.